Why make this game? Developer wrong organ? What's wrong with you? What could have possibly even prompted this to be an idea in your head? Hi, I'm Exalclaw. If you're new here, hello. If you're not new here, welcome back. Earlier this year, in fact, so early that I can say it was only a few weeks ago, I released a video about the devs from Thank Goodness You're Here and talked about how the game that I played from them, the Good Time Garden, and their future game are respectively the most disturbed and what could be the funniest game I played this year. How Fish is Made is the most sinister. This game proves that even when you see the word free next to a game on Steam or GOG or the Epic Game Store or whatever storefront of your choice is, there is still a cost. This time was my sanity. I don't know how to describe how Fish is made. It is a game that took me 40 minutes to finish, and the main mechanic is just pretty much answering the choices being given to you by the fish that you come across, but it's so much more than that. And so I'm going to try and break it down and talk about it in a way that's going to make you want to subject yourself to the same level of trauma. See, the simplest way I can explain this game is that you are a sardine that comes across other fish, also sardines, that give you a simple choice, up or down. You have no clue what you're going up to. You have no clue what you're going down to. There is no indication of what either of the choices actually make of a consequence. And therefore, from the get-go, the game makes its complete focus about the idea of choice rather than the one being made here. And it's very explicit about that being the discussion it wants to have. And it's not a discussion it's interested in having with you and like a throw you into the not deep side of the pool. Even the way the game starts, you don't kind of come into it in a very nice and I would say relaxed way. You are watching this fish basically fall down a chute and quite literally plop into what is just a disgusting and somewhat grotesquely offensive hallway of muted reds and browns and dark lighting, and this other fish is laughing at you in the corner. From the get-go, you can tell that this wants to make you uneasy, wants to unnerve you a little bit. And from the start, you can tell that this up or down question is going to be loaded. The trend starts with the first fish that you talk to, but you'll quickly realize as you go through the rest of this that every single fish seems to make their whole personality, their whole purpose of you coming across them to be interrogating you about your choice, about your thought process and making the choice and what you're going to do when you finally have to make it yourself. And what's interesting is that because they make so much of their personalities around what their choice is, the game ends up using each fish to basically dissect a different way in which choice affects other people. The game is honestly pretty comprehensive about its dissection of what choice is, and as a result gives you a lot of conversations that leave you with a lot more to think about than what you may have expected from initially. It covers themes of the comfort in decision making, about the anxiety that comes with decisions. The anxiety is specifically binary choice because two choices rather than a multitude makes it feel like there is a right option because it's only A or B. Talks about the comfort in making a decision not by yourself if you don't trust your own decision making process or intuition. It even discusses the illusion of choice and how that setup feels. It talks about that in a pretty big way actually, when I'll get to one of the scenes that has sat with me is what I'll call it for now. And I think overall, not just from its setting, but from some of the other conversations, it does this really great job of encompassing how choice being this larger than life thing makes it so scary. Tease a little bit here towards the end of the, I'll call it an experience. It is a game, but it feels so much more like an experience is the better word to describe it here. There's this lankier fish, bigger guy, husky, definitely a quarterback in however football works in the fish world, if they even have football. He has this really honest conversation with you, talking about how he's so used to like being the bigger guy, but when he's being faced with this choice in front of him, it's not something that can really overpower. Is like the tone that it takes. It's very clear to him that since he's so used to being the big guy of like just his immediate environment, that's always been its immediate problem solver in and of itself, so that when choice comes in front of him, the process and now the consequences start and end with him. Everything is in his hands, and as a result it's all much heavier. Again, this is a game about sardines, which I guess makes this a good time to start talking about some of the specific scenes in this that make me feel like anyone should just subject themselves to this for like any random hour that they have. First one I want to speak about being the scene I referenced earlier about the illusion of choice, what I have affectionately dubbed the fish in the gears. I'm not very subtle with my titling. The fish in the gears is odd because the minute that I saw this fish, I knew it was up. Looked like the kind of thing where if you saw it, unless you have the jaws of life on in front of you, it's looking like it's a pretty dismal result in someone's life being saved. Which honestly, I'll say this briefly, the game kind of catches right from the get-go with the fact that you're floundering around the entire time. There's not a whole lot of action going on in this thing. It's easy to move controller wise, but in actually watching your character, you are literally just kind of plop-plopping your way through the whole thing. It's meant to be not tumultuous per se, but it's not meant to look like an easy journey. It is definitely a fish being forced to move out of water at that. But back to the fish in the gear, you talk to this little dude and you realize that like, oh, for a brief second you're like, oh wait, you can save them. Because he's asking you, hey, save me, please. Just don't touch that big red button. And you know, I see a big red button. Part of me wants to press it, of course, but I know not to touch it. But what's even more disturbing is at first having talked to the character and, you know, this being a game, him talking about being saved, my brain immediately goes to try to find something in the immediate environment which lets me go forward and save this dude at the same time. But a quick look at the way the mechanism works, anyone that can put two and two together and get four will be able to tell that there's no getting out of this without pressing that red button. It's a choice, but not really. In the sense of if you want to finish this game, if you want to do what I'm doing and talk about it with other people in like a comprehensive way, you need to move forward, which means you need to press the big red button. And the game makes it a disturbing and unsettling process because, spoiler alert, you'll watch your buddy blow up. I think it's one of the first moments that like really had a huge impact on me in the game because having spent so much time already having these people ask me this question over and over again, up or down, it feels like the game's really trying to hone in on the idea of choice. And immediately when I think about choice personally translates to, okay, free will. I know I can be in control of my actions and I can choose how I progress forward. But as I quickly realized, not only is this game right up until you make the choice always down a very linear one hallway format that tells you exactly where to go forward, but then the fish in the gear just tells you, hey, sometimes you're going to be presented a choice and realize the choice was made for you a long time ago. See my eyes? You see how they're kind of quivering because I'm a little fucked up from thinking about that? Sardines. Now, this next scene captures another feeling that I had while playing this game best. The feeling of entering a room where everyone is already laughing. And then when you walk in, they just start laughing harder. You don't know what the joke is, but you know you're not in on it. Coming across this parasite in this fish, at first I was just thinking this was going to be some kind of other discussion on how choice is not necessarily made for you, and it feels like it because I'm seeing parasite in fish's mouth. I see parasite talking literally out of someone else's mouth. Come on, it's right in front of me for analyzing. And then every part of my detective thinking about this from a media literacy point of view, part of my brain went out the window when the musical number started. Like, did I just get an ad for sardines? Did I get an anti-ad for sardines? Was this supposed to make me want to become a pescatarian or just a vegan? Was this supposed to make me just think about, do fish feel? Why do I need to think about, do fish feel? Do fish feel? It's just one of those moments that like, I'm so glad it's there. Like, I'm not mad that the musical number is there. It's such a vibe moment of the game of being like, listen, you already know there's not like a super comprehensive story here. We're going off of you taking some themes away. And that right there feels so in tune with just how comical decision making as a process can be. How you're going to press on something and sometimes you're going to get a whole new bunch of information that's just going to be like, what the f? looking at it. It's such an odd departure from everything else that's been slow, that's been mechanical. The soundtrack up until this point has been very, I guess, meant to heighten whatever's going on dialogue wise. It's leaning into its atmosphere, so it's a little unnerving. It's a bit grand when it needs to be, but it's never distracting. It's meant to really hone in on the fact that you are in an uncomfortable environment. So then to get this Parasite that obviously got rejected for a High School Musical 2 audition just tap dancing in front of me, talking about how he and his critters mess up fish and how fish might feel pain and why you should feel really weird about eating sushi next time you eat sushi. It kept me on my toes, and it was like a great way to almost as a palate cleanser for the other bits of weirdness you've already been experiencing. And the game doesn't get any less strange from there. It gets weirder not only in its setting but also in its approach to challenging your idea of what choices are like full circle. And I think that palate cleanser of a moment was a perfect segue into the next part that tonally feels so detached. Not in a bad way, but it's just like you just had this huge musical number that's basically shaking up your senses again. And then as you go forward, remembering now that you have a choice to make, you just enter this room full of eyeballs. Eyeballs everywhere. A voice comes out of the blue, I'm assuming out of someone's pupil, and starts almost mocking you, laughing at the fact that you're still going forward despite what's already going on. Again, bringing in a bit of that sinister tone of something's wrong here, but everyone's also laughing at you while knowing that something is wrong. And I loved this little inclusion just because that's another part of making choices, the perception of what that choice might mean when others view you making that choice. It's a nice way of addressing the angle of how much is your decision making being affected by knowing someone else is in the room looking at you. Who are you when no one else is looking at the decisions that you are making? It's a great little moment to kind of re-emphasize that's what's going on because, it's kind of easy to forget that part because you're a fish for the most part. A fish in a place that, unless I don't know what you get up in your personal life that would have you in this situation, I just know that me personally, I would never be turned into a sardine going through a hellish Guillermo del Toro version of a sushi factory. So again, or just a sardine packaging facility. Maybe that's the better way to put it actually. Regardless, it just kind of reminds you of like, hey, no, even this little critter has something looking at them while they're making decision. It's like the judgment is a fundamental part of the decision making process. You see why I gotta talk about this now, how I need to get this out of my head, because I don't want to be thinking about sardines this way every time I see them in the store now. The game even has a way of making fun of just even the idea of this video, because you go into that room full of eyes, or you go a little bit past it, and you come across another fish who's just chilling in this middle of this room. So he's obviously up to something bad. He's up to no good. And he starts going on to this grand discussion about how none of this was about choice. This was about conviction. This was about being willing to stick with whatever decision you made along the route of talking to each fish, whether you were actually going to stick to your choice of up or down. Now, me personally, from the minute I got the question, I chose down every single time just because I was like, oh, if I'm going to get two options, I don't know what this game is going to do to me, so I'm just going to choose down and just see what happens. Having done that, it was like the game was telling me, hey, that's what it was about. Were you going to stick with yourself after even seeing the doubts of others, after seeing the confidence of others? How much do other people's choices affect your own choices? And as you're spending all this time, or at least as I was spending all this time, interrogating my own process and thinking about the words that this sardine just said, the sardine basically goes, hey, by the way, remember, I'm just a fish in an imposing looking room. And that just, to my face, it's like that one sentence undercut the entire vibe of the room. It didn't make things less sinister. Even that kind of like schlocky jokeness in such serious moments has a bit of a almost unnerving undertone itself. But at the end of the day, it's also a bit of a wake-up call moment. So I love the way that kind of, I don't know, almost brought me out of my own little box as I was playing this too. And then as we get very close to finishing the game, this is where we meet the bigger fish that I mentioned a little bit earlier. What I said about that fish stands. It's really interesting how his own perception of self gets constantly challenged because the fact that it is choice and the idea of choice is bigger than all of us, and him recognizing that. And I guess now making a game plan with us because of that was really wonderful to see. It was actually maybe the most wholesome moment of the game, because everyone else up until that point is like reveling in their decision, kind of making you question yourself, almost mocking you for not holding the same view. But then there's this person, this person, this fish, who's kind of having a coming to Jesus moment, I guess is the best way to put it, where they realize this idea is so much larger than them, and so it actually forces them to work with other people. It forces them to break out of their shell and talk to someone else, because, and in this case someone else being you, because it's just not something that they can tackle alone. And I think that's wonderful. I think all decision making benefits from a little external interrogation from someone else. That's why we all go to each other or go to someone else in our life and we want to make major decisions or even small ones. So then you have that cute little conversation. Actually, I'll say this before I forget. This was the only time in the game where you get a chance to see numbers, which like was not something that I was suspecting at all, actually, since so much of it seemed to be focused on almost the interpersonal aspect of decision making. But then you get these raw numbers in front of you of like, this many people went up, this many people went down. And it's like, oh, I mean, duh. This is one of the biggest way people be influenced. Data moves mountains, people. Research and data moves mountains. So the fact that the game not only gives you the choice to see this data, but then, make your choice again with that in mind, is so cool. It's like asking you, hey, do you want the potential to be influenced? And now that you have these numbers, does that change what you did? And again, I stuck with down the entire time, so it did it for me. But it was still such an interesting moment to be like, huh, all right then. Which then finally, in the summation of the game, you get shown the two options, up, down. The only time in the game that you can go one or the other in the pathway, it's where the hallway of singularity finally breaks apart. I went down into the black abyss and got put on a burger, which again, I can't be surprised of. I was a sardine. I was going to get eaten. Yum, yum. But it was such a interesting moment to end off on. And there's actually I'm skipping a little bit, because even before we get into that little hamburger end scene, they start throwing some of these really raw quotes, to be honest, were some of the best moments of talking about the emotional aspect of making a decision. Because at the end of the day, it's you making a decision, so every decision feels personal. And I think my interpretation of these last quotes that start being thrown at the screen at you is that because choices are fundamentally personal things, there's a bit of protectiveness that you have around it being just yours, about being your experience, and wanting to almost revel in that, even at your disadvantage. It then ends up on this nicer note of being like, hey, yes, these decisions are personalized, but also understand that pain that you're feeling of going through that, even if thinking that other people are going through it might diminish it, it doesn't. Up or down, you're going to be good because the decision will have been made. Like, that's kind of the tone that it feels like it ends off for me personally. So yeah, man. I mean, it was such an odd little experience. Again, what the is the musical number? Like, just tap dance and Parasite. Oh god. But I really enjoyed this. It was such a weird but cute experience that I felt like was worth highlighting, because you should definitely suggest it to someone that hasn't played it so you can mess with their mind. That's it for this video. I hope you check this out yourself. If nothing else, just for the musical number and to take a screenshot of a tap dancing Parasite for a profile photo later. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your loved ones. Ciao.